Welcome to the inaugural episode of Pacheco's Pals. Today, Kai, Nikayla, Irina, and Jared are going to be talking about feminized labor, convivencia, and el goce comunal, or what we're calling this episode,
Voices from the Domestic Sphere.
Our central question is, how does gender inform the working experiences of Mexican peoples in the domestic labor economy in the USA? We'll be starting off with Irina.
So the first concept I want to bring up is feminized labor, and I want to start off with a quote from page 158 of Women's Collectives in the Politicized Reproduction of Social Life by Mariana Mora. The quote is as follows: "In this sense, the reproduction of the workforce is based to a large extent on activities conducted in the domestic sphere, such as preparing food, washing clothes, administering household finances, and caring for the well-being and health of family members." This quote to me embodies the epitome of feminized labor, explaining that this division of work allows men to participate in productive work outside the home. These tasks are essential and almost exclusively delegated to women, which emphasizes the key role that these social reproduction activities have.
Totally.
Without even mentioning the particularities of the Mexican-American feminized labor experience, the implicit responsibilities of women in the family and the labor they contribute is central to the family experiences of most Americans, regardless of race, ethnicity, class, or gender. However, it does get more complicated when you introduce the experiences of Mexican-American women in the domestic work economy.
That reminds me of when my grandma would take me, from a super young age to work with her, and I'd be in charge of watching the kids while she cleaned the house and then cooked dinner for the family. And that also reminds me of a scene from the movie Roma, where the mestiza boss drunkenly tells her indigenous maid, "In the end, we women are always alone," as if they have something in common, which is this very second-wave feminist idea that domestic work can be a site of shared female solidarity. But domestic work doesn't bring all women together, with class and race continuing to distance experiences marked by different privileges and oppressions.
Yeah, and I do want to know on my mother's experience. Throughout my mother's seamstress career, she has endured various forms of abuse, such as psychological, economic, and sexual abuse, and as well as labor exploitation. Some of the examples were, she was once told to throw my sister in the trash. She was paid significantly less than men. She was sexually assaulted by her boss, and she had to work from home and often late into the night. I didn't have a chance to ask her how did she cope with these experiences today, and she mentioned that, quote unquote, "Well, it makes me angry, and although you find out now that at that time you could have done something, but you didn't do it because it could have been fired. You feel bad, you get angry, you say, why did they treat me like that?" I further asked her how did she cope with these traumas while still going to work when they happen, and she said, "Well, scared. You said, I can't say anything because if they'll fire me." And furthermore, I asked her how does she still cope with these traumas today. She says, "Well, nothing. I just say, it's over. They're not here anymore. Maybe they've even died. Sometimes I remember. And I say what would happen if they died."
Yeah.
This brings us to the theoretical discussion of convivencia, or the sense of belonging in place and community, especially in regards to shared lived experiences of Mexican Americans. On page 90 of Sanchez's book, The Children of Salaga, particularly chapter 3 titled Returning to the Land of Fallen Leaves, a quote I wanted to explore is, "Convivencia that occurred among previous generations of Soligeños fosters kinship, familiarity, community, and reciprocity." Sanchez argues that this ensures community viability. Convivencia predates individuals and extends to ancestral ties between family and community. Similar to the Zapotec system of reciprocity, or guazón, and the ties immigrants in LA establish through support they lend to their community in times of need, as well as a sense of responsibility for paisanos or countrymen.
I found that my grandma really connects to this concept of convivencia because she, along with family and neighbors she lived next to for decades, are part of a system called Cundina, where they all pool money and people take what they need for rent or any emergency payments like house repairs or accident bills, And that's all built upon trust, reciprocity, and community support.
Right.
Yeah, and similar to Nikayla, my mother is also part of a group that provides financial support to one another. In this case, everyone makes a consistent contributions to a common fund, and each person gets the full amount in turn. Like my mother, she contributes to this common fund every weekend, and when it's time for her to receive that fund, she uses that fund to pay off bills.
Yeah, without the financial security afforded by community support in the way that, Nikayla's family and Jarrett's family are given, it's hard to build stability in a new place. Convivencia builds belonging through financial flexibility, social support, and a shared sense of a community, which then benefits everyone involved. This brings us to our third concept of communal joy, or el goce comunal, which is described in the Children of Salaga in the introduction on page 24 as the communal joy diasporic Salagüeños experience through their communal practices, particularly from celebrations in honor of their community's patron saints. She says, I understand fiestas and the communal enjoyment of fiestas as acts of resistance. So without communal joy, or el goce comunal, individuals are made to feel the brunt of alienation alone. In Jarrett's mother's case, she talked about how this isolation is characterized by dissociation, anger, and helplessness, where she felt powerless to prevent injustices against her and her fellow workers for fear of retribution by docking pay or even firing her, as you said. But the support of a community creates a space of shared solidarity within the common feelings of powerlessness, where the drudgery of alienation is broken by joy. Sanchez speaks specifically to the community shared by diasporic indigenous immigrants from Salaga, but the assimilation project of mestizaje, while not actively enacted in the U.S. and is a product of Mexico, does prevent mestizaje Mexican Americans from being able to experience shared solidarity in an indigenous identity in the same way that Salaga, or the Children of Salaga, speaks to.
Yeah, like, for example, my mother said explicitly, when asked if she's indigenous, she said that no, because I'm not dumb like them.
Yeah, like my grandma laughed when I asked if she's indigenous, responding that she's neither indigenous or mestiza, I'm just Mexican, which really exemplifies the erasure of ethnic identity in favor of the national identity.
And what a perfect segue back to Sanchez on page 16 and 17, again in the introduction, where she says that settler logics of native elimination continue to manifest in the lives of indigenous migrants from Latin America when they cross into the United States and are interpolated through their national identities, such as Nikayla's grandmother, rather than as members of indigenous communities. This is really similar to immigration, where Latinx are told there are more opportunities in the U.S., where, similar to that, the idea of mestizaje means giving up your cultural and physical markers of indigeneity that will somehow increase your lot in life, quote unquote, again from Sanchez on page 5. Yet Jarrett's mother's mestiza privilege and identity doesn't protect her from the dangers of wage labor, feminized labor, assault, and dehumanization that she experienced and was traumatized by in the U.S. Nikayla's family, too, is disconnected from any ethnic roots in particular and have embraced national identity instead. So I want to ask Nikayla, how does this make you reflect on your grandmother's experiences with building a home and community in the USA without the cultural markers of assimilated or indigenous identity?
Well, when I was asking her these questions, I asked how she kind of kept herself connected to her country, but she really did feel disconnected ever since leaving, because she lived in Santa Monica as a live-in maid where there weren't a lot of Latinos, and she was kind of isolated with like a lack of community. And the employer disconnected her, isolated her from everyone, and even like telling her sister when she called that she wasn't there. She had no friends, saying that if she went outside, the immigration would get her. So like disrupting those community bonds was a tool used to subjugate her, which really highlights the importance of community. So when she finally escaped and worked for an employer who gave her one day off, she would go dancing with her sister that she was finally reunited with and able to relax after the week's work.
Yeah.
That's great that she had that means of escape. I just had one last question for you both. How did your family members bring their cultural and communal practices with them when they immigrated, and how do they honor their roots in their new homes?
Well, honestly, my grandma kind of had a hard time with immigrating here. She was like stuck in the desert for like 3 days. She didn't have much with her. Yeah, so the only thing that she really had was the food or like the recipes from back home. So food was really a big connector to her.
Yeah, when my mother immigrated from Mexico to the United States, one of the biggest ways she maintained that cultural heritage was food, like you mentioned, and she continued to make homemade meals, like such as tamales, mole, and pozole, especially for special occasions. Like this past December, my mom was part of this religious ceremony, and she helped prepare the mole for people who were part of that religious ceremony, and they ate it when they were dancing, drinking, and just partying.
That's beautiful. But diasporic mestizos such as Jarrett's mom, like you said, while sharing a Mexican nationality with indigenous Latinx, are removed from their indigenous roots by both physical distance, time, and intentional assimilation under the cultural project of mestizaje, of being a product of the 1930s in Mexico and the building of nationalism there. So their lack of indigenous connection in their diaspora prevents them from banding together in el goce comunal in the same way. However, this doesn't diminish the importance of interpersonal relationships and shared joy as resistance in the face of trauma. While they are not indigenized in the same way that the Children of Salaga talks about, they are still racialized, and both systems continue to interplay in differing ways that still ultimately reinforce the importance of joy as an act of resistance.
And then just to conclude, we found that domestic labor is still heavily divided by gender. However, there is a cultural movement shifting traditionally feminine domestic roles to the responsibility of both men and women.
Yeah, domestic labor such as seamstress work that my mother did exploited and abused undocumented immigrants, especially women. These hostile environments were further prevented as collective groups began to emerge to win basic labor protections. Unfortunately, some workers never experienced these protections and continued to struggle under the abusive conditions.
Yeah, despite the perception of progress, domestic labor remains shaped by racial and gendered hierarchies that keep indigenous and working class Mexican women in subordinate roles. Framed as empowerment, paid domestic work often offers limited mobility, low wages, and limited protections, like Jarrett said, forcing women into labor out of necessity rather than choice.
Colonialism and settler colonialism today is upheld by the labeling of wage labor as feminist onto indigenous and mestizaje immigrant women who work not out of feminism, but actually out of necessity and survival, which continues both historically and today. So, to conclude, we are Pacheco's Pals. I'm Kai.
I'm Irina.
I'm Nikayla.
I'm Jared, and
Thank you,
Thank you
for
for
listening.